Okay. Hey everybody, welcome to the this session on JDatabase. Pardon me, I got a bit of a cough last night. I'm trying to get over that, but might have some lozenges while we're speaking. But so today we're going to talk about JDatabase. So quickly, I'll introduce myself. My name is Jim D. I'm from Portland, Oregon. I have a company called Array Web Development, and I'm a Joomla shop in Portland, basically. And there's 4 or 5 Joomla-based developers in Portland that I know. I met one here that I hadn't known before, so that was kind of neat, from my own hometown. Basically, I want to talk about JDatabase today at this session, and I would like to talk momentarily about why. I like to intersperse my presentations with cat graphics because I just like them. But so for this one, the cats are all empowered, which I think is what this is about. When clients come to me, I did put in the description to this seminar, at least I don't think it made it into the booklet, but on the website, I appealed to the developer's sense of making a living, and I said, you can make more money if you understand JDatabase. And not to sound greedy, but really it's about the client as well, because the client gets what they want when you're able to give them what they're asking for. And in terms of just business development as a developer and getting new clients, it's quite often that the reason I get them is because they come to me and they say they've been shopping around. They're trying to find, they have some need that other developers will just tell them, well, I can't do it. And really, it might only be like 20 lines of code. It's not a big deal. I mean, all the data is in the Joomla database. It's just a matter of, can you get it out? So that's what this is about, kind of helping you just do that. Now, yeah, I mentioned here, you could, if you're, I think I'm not really familiar with all the terminology that everyone's using here, but they call it integrators. And I don't know, I may be getting this wrong, but I think some people see themselves as they have to just use something out of the box. If it's not in the JED, they can't do it. And so sometimes a client will say, well, I need this certain module on this page, and you say, well, okay, I know how to do that because that's in K2. And so now you have to install K2 just to get this one module. And to me, that's a lot of overhead if that's all I'm going to use it for. Now, not to disparage K2 because it does a lot of great things. But if you're only putting a whole system in just to use one module, well, maybe you can look at just coding that yourself. So anyway, these are all these great reasons. You can download these slides. I'll blow this up. You can get the address for this. All these slides are online. But I want to get it right into this stuff. So clients need to get stuff done is what I'm trying to say, and that's one great reason to learn this, because they have needs and they're not getting them all met. But they also need to get things done right. So that's another reason. So I found this picture of this cat going crazy here, and that's basically me. This is an actual example. I don't know if you can see this very well. I can see if I can Control+ this a little bit for you guys. But if anybody's done any database work, any coding at all, hopefully everyone here codes a little bit, PHP, MySQL. Okay, all right, good. This is an example of a client who came to me just a couple of months ago, and they said they're having a problem with this script. This is the code. When I got in there, I thought, oh my God, they literally were just taking all their posts and gets straight raw, right out of a form. No validation, 0, and straight into the database. And I mean, you can look up here and you say, okay, look at that JOS prefix there. So it's old, this code anyway. But I mean, 0 scrubbing. And look, see, I don't know if you can see this one down here, card number. It was even an e-commerce site. They were taking credit cards and storing it in the database. I think they may have had this one here didn't come straight off the post. They actually did run it through a function to encode it a little bit, which was the only thing they did. It was even remotely responsible. But I was surprised. I almost wanted to hack the site myself just for fun. I was seeing this. I almost wanted to go in and just ruin it. And it actually wasn't hacked. The problem wasn't that they got hacked. But I can't believe it's been in existence that long. And it was pervasive throughout the component. Whoever built it, that's just the methods that they use. They just decided that, why should I scrub the data at all? So, I can't speak to why anybody would do that, but it does make you want to go a little bit nuts. So I do see that kind of thing from time to time. So before we get going here, I just want to share two quick ways if you need to start messing around with JDatabase that you can do so very easily. One is just by creating a Joomla environment with a couple lines of code that you can just make a directory on your Joomla install somewhere on a test site, call it scripts or something, and just throw this in one. This is basically what happens when you look at the administrator or the site index.php file and strip away all the error handling and stuff. You're just basically going to see this, which instantiates the application. So if you type this in the Joomla one, you're going to see this magic constant because Joomla is in the directory it's in, so it's going to work. But here I put this in /courses/JDatabase blah blah blah. So I had to actually define this root path here. But anyway, basically once I type this in and hit go, then you're going to see hello world, which is in itself is no big deal. But the big deal is that we're now that hello world is coming in after we've instantiated Joomla. So now we can do in our code after we have this anything that Joomla does. Well, most of the things anyway. And one of the things is we can work with the database. So that's why I just wanted to show you a quick way to just do that. Another way that's really good, if anybody's familiar with the Jumi extension, Jumi, it allows you to run code within articles or modules or anyway. So within that, you could, for example, make an article called My Database Test and set up a menu item for that so that you can go to it on your site. So it'd be mysite.com/mydatabasetest, for example. And then in that article, you just put a little snippet and it would just say, it would be a bracket and it would say Jumi, and then it would say scripts, and it would have the path to your script, and it would basically run your script there. That's another way you can do it really, really quick. And then you can just start coding this database stuff and get you to know it. And you can also do this within the context of a formal Joomla component or extension as well. But I just want to give you some easy examples so that we can just take a look at this stuff. So the first thing, so everything I'll show you here, just imagine that we had that other code running, and then this is the code we're going to be looking at. So this is really the syntax for it. You're going to see you need to make the object here, and then you just have to build out your query. So they have all these ways: query, select, and you're telling it here. I'm saying select the title from. Now in Joomla you need to put a # and 2 underscores and then the name of the table. That's just the way that we do it in Joomla. So from content, which everyone knows is the main content, and here I've just hard coded. I say where the ID is 342. That's just the ID. And then here you say you set your query. That Joomla gets your query ready, and then Joomla executes your query. This used to be called db query also, but then they updated it. Now you write db execute. And then you say how you want your result. So here I'm just saying, it's one result. They have this method called load result. It just loads the one thing that you're looking for. So there's all these different. I'm not showing my notes on here. I'm going to share these slides later so that you can go and kind of get all the notes and everything. But yeah, load result loads one thing, which is very handy because quite often in a component or any database application, you just need one thing real quick, and you do need that a lot. So it's great to be able to just go get that one thing and then keep going with your code. So anyway, when you run just that short thing, and on my site, I'm just running it directly on my site. This is the article that comes up: 12 ways to drive traffic to your site. And then here is a little. I put this in there just to kind of help you. It's just I wrote our query equals query toString. So it has this toString method, which you find in a lot of Joomla classes. And that allows you to take a look at what the query was so that you can see what Joomla built out for you. When you did all this stuff here, Joomla first builds a query and then it runs it. And so you can see what the query was. That's very handy in development to be able to see what the query was that Joomla made for you, because sometimes they don't work, especially when you get into, it's not that they don't work, it's human error, not Joomla. They don't work because you did it wrong, basically. But it's, programming is so humbling all the time because you always think, what did I do? Well, you did something wrong. When you start getting into advanced queries like joins and things like that, you can take a look here and you can see that you can look at your query and say, oh, I know what I did. Yeah, maybe I spelled where wrong or something like that, or whatever it is. So anyway, you run this query, and you get these things because we said to echo out the result, which was the one thing. So there it is. So if you needed a module to go, whatever reason, to just get the latest title, this is the exact code for that. So it's actually very simple. The coding is very simple thanks to JDatabase. Yes, you could not use JDatabase, but you're going to run into a lot of trouble potentially if you don't, because you may have to manage passwords and manage a lot of other junk that Joomla makes very easy for you within its development environment. So so the things that you select, I put down here, like you could select everything. I don't even think you need the backticks before the star. You could just put the star. So the asterisk means select everything. But if you did that, you couldn't use load result, because load result just wants one thing. So you need to know, if you kind of in advance, what you want to do. Let me go to some more slides, because I know it's kind of a quick presentation here. So here's a tangential point. Let's say that base before we said query select, where we did the different statements. You could, if you ever wanted to, just write query and write your query the old-fashioned way, just as a long SQL statement right here. And then you could run it through Joomla's engine here and get the same thing. So sometimes this is handy for development purposes, because sometimes you can get the query right structurally, but you just can't get Joomla's JDatabase to kind of understand what you want. And this is a good way to find out if that's the case. Like if it runs when you do it this way, but it doesn't run when you do it the way I showed you on the last page, then there's something you haven't done right when you're talking to JDatabase. And I think when we go through this, you'll see some of the things that could go wrong. So those cats are looking up at the result. They're so excited about that. Let's see what we got here. So let's say you want to make a function or a method out of that. So this is, here we go. So let's say you have your code, and maybe you had a form that says, what article do you want? A little form. And the person inputted 342. So let's just imagine that you have other code where you've accepted that via post or get or whatever. And now you have 342 as the article that's being requested. So you have here, I would say, like, the title equals, and here's my function that I made, sample title, of this, 342. Now I'm saying echo out the title, and you can see it went and got it. So that's great. So within this function here, we're going to introduce a couple of new concepts. So it's basically the same stuff as you saw before, the same code. All this code, don't take any notes. This is all, I made a little library, which you'll see a link to there. And I'm going to give you guys the address for these slides, so you'll be able to go get a whole library of all this stuff and just copy it and put it in your just use it whenever you want. But anyway, so here we start introducing the concept of what the other person wasn't doing in that other script I showed you, because we don't want SQL injection attacks on our site. We don't want to get hacked and somebody delete our entire database. Here I'm saying, yeah, go get the title from content, but here I'm saying where the ID equals, so now we've typecasted that INT, I'm sorry, the ID, which is passed from here. So it's get article ID is taken in from your form or whatever, 342, and I'm saying go get 342, and here it's called the ID, so that's 342. And when it gets down to here, it gets cast in an integer, which is going to be 342 because it's 342. But if somebody had written in the form drop table where 1 equals 1 or something like that, they put that in, it's not going to make it through there. It's just going to get typecast to 0, and then you're going to get an error. You're not going to get any result is what you're going to get. 0, no result. So you're protected. So this is an example of when you're working with integers, how you want to do that. You want to make sure you cast that to an integer first. Anyway, that's one way of making it into a function or a method, which you can put into your classes or whatever. Let's see, I'm missing a few points here. Yeah, so I like to over-validate and over-scrub my data. When I'm building forms out and I'm taking in information, I mean, these functions are great, but always just know what you're doing. Always try to imagine there are bad people out there doing bad things, because they are. And I've seen many sites get hacked because of not paying attention to this kind of stuff. So in this example here, I'm just showing you an example because I know I'm passing a number to this, and I'm still typecasting it to an int, just as a best practice. On the bottoms down here, I've included some links to some resources such as Joomla Secure Coding Guidelines, and on some other pages there's some relevant documentation on JDatabase as well, with some other examples that Joomla's own documentation gives you. So let me go to the next page. So here's a little bit even more dynamic of a function that I'll introduce some more things for. So in my components, you're always wanting to get one piece of information. It's just quite common. Because anything you're working with, even Joomla itself, when you're in an article view, there's the information about that article. There's the ID of the article, and you find yourself needing to get one piece of information all the time. So here's a function that you might find handy. It's called get single value. So what this does is it takes that whole idea and just abstracts it into the ability for you to run it in one line of code. So I say, this is just like a way to take JDatabase and even it adds another layer of utility on top of it. Because I'm saying, get single value, so it's get the column from what table, where what column equals what. So this allows you to say, get something from something where something equals something. That's what, and this is probably the most common thing, which is why I just made a little method out of it. So basically here I'm saying, let's say I took in that article, that article ID of 342. So I'm saying, so the title of it equals, and this is in one line of code, get single DB value. So that's our function. I want the title. So the get column is like, what are you getting? I want the title. From where? From the table, from content. Where what, which is where the ID equals where value, the article ID, which is at 342. And then here, it's saying what kind of variable is that? And I'm saying it's an int. So up here I've made a couple possibilities. There's int or string. And because that means, when you're talking about safety and so forth, we typecast the ints to integers so that 342 matches 342. But what if you're looking it up based on something that's in text? You don't want to cast that to an integer because it's going to be 0. And so you want to do what's called a DB quote here. And that will, Joomla will, the JDatabase will add the proper escaping and so forth so that people can't do SQL injection type shenanigans on your queries. So here, as an example, I'm saying get the title. And then we're going to echo out the title, which is here. So top 12 ways to drive traffic. That pulls it up based on the 342 ID, because I'm saying where the ID equals that, and it's an int. And then here I'm saying, well, what was the ID? Now let's get the ID again based on that title. So I use the same line of code. I'm saying get one value. This time, give me the ID where the title equals this thing we just looked up. And this time it's a string. And so it didn't typecast it to a 0. It just left it as a string, but Joomla made it safe, passed it through, and it got us the ID back. I don't know why you'd ever want to do that, because you already know the ID, but just as an example. As I wrote over here, I like to use methods like this for all of my single value needs. When you're writing a component or whatever it is, you're just going to find all the time. I used to write these big frameworks for people, and I always needed to pull in one thing, and I'd have a method or a function that says, go get the part number, or go get the widget number. And then I had another method saying, go get this, go get that. And after a while, I started, I'm doing the same thing over and over. I'm just asking for one thing. So that's why I wrote this little tool here, and it really works out well. Oh, by the way, so here, when I say select the get column from the table, they also have a quote name method here, which makes the table name itself safe. Now, I'm the one typing in, __ content. I'm saying, I'm obviously not going to hack my own site, so it's pretty safe if I don't do that. But still, it's probably good practice to actually go ahead and put that in there, just in case for whatever reason you might start using this in other contexts or whatever. But it's probably a good idea to overdo it on security-wise. But yeah, so they give you those methods too, and there's also shortcuts available. Like quote name can be dbqn, and db quote can be dbq. So once you get going on these things, you can actually, there's some shorthands they give you. So that was one thing we're still looking at. Now let's look at what if you want an array or an object back? So those are great too. This time we're going to ask for multiple items. We want the ID, the title, and the alias here in this example. Still from content, but now let's give it a where clause where it's going to give you more than one thing. So I'm saying give me everything over with an ID over 300. And there you see over on the right the array that comes up. Because I've asked for a load assoc list is the name of this method. And so it gave me all this stuff back. It gave me a nicely indexed set of data back where you can just see it. Item 0, here's the ID of that. Item 1, here's the ID. Then, So in this way, you could build a module such as in Joomla's list recent articles module, or say you want a list of recent articles and it lists to those things and it links back to those. You could kind of build that with something like this. You'd have to build out how the URLs are actually linked on the site. It would be a little more difficult than just this, but still, I mean, this gives you the essential data that you'd need. I didn't realize I'm walking back and forth pointing. Hope that's okay. But this is a great way to get a nice array, a nice indexed set of data back. And so the associated list does that, gives you an array. And so you would access that data by, here's sample ID equals record set item 0 ID. So if you wanted the second one, you'd say item 1, title, and that would give you anti-networking lessons over there. So you can iterate through these in a for next loop or a for each loop or whatever you want in order to do such a thing. So and let's say this guy here, this is the syntax for if you want to limit how many results. So I've asked for only 10. There's 1,000. You might not want 1,000. You just want 10, and this will tell you where you want it if you want to have the offset start at like a certain record and keep going. Here I just set it to 0, but you could set it to whatever. So in your code you could say I want from 50 on or from 100 on or from 0 on, or you could just leave these out and just take the whole set of whatever it gives you, and there might be 2,000 articles and you have a large array that comes back that you have to then iterate through. But sometimes that's what you want. So these code examples you can kind of go through when you're playing with this on your own and substitute in and out different elements that make sense for you and whatever you're looking for. So here's the same thing, but done with an object instead. And so it's basically the same exact query, but instead you want to work with an object. So now you're just going to say echo results object index item 0 title, little arrow title. And that'll give you the same thing as before, but just in an object context instead. So it depends on whatever your preferences are or whatever your needs are. The somewhere in here, I don't know if it's this link or one of the other notes, there's links direct to the Joomla documentation on what all the types of requests you can make and how they're. And it's great. It's a great resource. So I encourage you to go back and get these links after the course if you need it. So now we get to updating. I kind of approach this in terms of how I view the danger of working with databases. I think selecting is the most innocent type of interaction with a database because you're not messing anything up in the database. You're just asking for information. And yeah, you can hang it up if you ask for something that's really complicated or whatever, but most of the time you're going to be fine just selecting information. Updating is sort of the next level of danger in my opinion, because now you're actually changing things. And in Joomla that may or may not be okay, depending on what you're changing. But often you're working with your own tables where you're quite fine with that. So let's say that I've had a form where it's in information from a user, and I guess he's updating his name. Jeff Lebowski, his new login name is going to be the dude. So we're running this type of code here, saying I'm going to update. Here's our table. Update users. Set the name equals new name, which is Jeff Lebowski. Set the username equals, and I see I'm quoting these to make them safe. New login name, which is the dude. Where the ID equals, and let's imagine that somehow I've retrieved this user's ID as 1, 2, 3. Set the query, execute the query, bam, and now you're going to get that his login name and his name are updated. So that's all you have to do to update a record using the JDatabase. Now over here is another way you can do it. This is based on an example on the Joomla documentation site. So here they're saying first make an array of the fields you want to update, and then any conditions, and then run your query here. So it's basically saying, I'm going to set the name to the new name, the username is that, where the ID is this, and then you run it kind of like this. This here, where you see the methods right in a row, it's called daisy chaining or chaining of methods. Joomla does support that, so you can get into that. It's an advanced topic, but you don't have to do it. So you don't have to have that all on one line if you don't want. But that's just an example from their site, and the result is the execute command, and it would update it that way too. Personally, I like this way a little better. I find it more intuitive, but that way is also available if you wanted to do it. And both of those ways are documented. Oh, and so this here is also an array. So these conditions, you could have multiple conditions listed, because it's not always where ID equals 1, 2, 3. It could be where ID is 1, 2, 3 and something else and something else. So if you're kind of familiar with the way SQL queries are structured, then you kind of would understand hopefully you understand what I'm saying by that. This topic is so like esoteric, it's just it's hard to imagine that many people in the world understand it, but I'm glad to see everybody here. So here's a similar function for that same thing, where I'm just saying, do update single value, I call it. And you're saying set, so I'm saying set table. This is the table I'm updating. Set the column to this, where the column is this. And then I've talked about which types they are. So over here I said the new login name was the dude, the target's 1, 2, 3, and then I've boiled it down to just this line of code. I find this really handy in terms of developing your own components where you're doing a lot of database interaction, because it saves you from having to put a lot of code. You know, as you know, like right, doing functions and methods that's why we do that. So it's nice and compact and easy to refer it, easy to use, reuse code and stuff. But I like these nice, tidy little methods. So I'll let you guys read about. You can always go back and experiment with that. But this particular little function can handle integers, floating point decimals, or strings. So floats are a little weird because it's like floating point decimals. You don't want to integerize those. You don't want to typecast those to integers because it's not going to match up in your database right. So you kind of have to know what you're dealing with too. If you have a database that requires certain types of fields, like long floating, like a 20 point, like a 10-digit decimal, you need to make sure that your functions and methods can handle that. So the float would be able to handle that, but the int wouldn't. So you need to sometimes go back and massage these to fit your needs, whatever it is you're trying to accomplish database-wise. So this is kind of an interesting thing I came across once with a client who was having trouble with a query. He couldn't get it to work. They said, give me find me everything that has a field 1 value of 1, 2, 3, and a field 2 value of either 0 or anything between 3, 4, and 3, 4, 5. So the code is like, all right, show me the query, select something where the field value is 1, 2, 3, or where the field value here is 2, or, and then they put this in parentheses, greater than 2, 3, 4, or less than 2, 3, 4, 5. That seemed right. But Joomla, and now when I talked about showing you the query to help you diagnose your problems, I said, yeah, show me that query, Joomla. And Joomla says, oh, here's what we were doing. Select from the table, and here, where field is 1, 2, 3, and field 2 equals 0, or that. So, that wasn't the intended result, because it's saying where this is 1, 2, 3, and this, or anything here. That's not right. What's right is where the field is 1, 2, 3, that's the first thing, and this next thing, this whole thing would need to be in parentheses. If you look at this maybe later, when you go back and you pull the slide up at home, you kind of see that this is a very important distinction, because it doesn't pull up, it pulls up different data, which in this case, this was the correct data that the client wanted. And the lesson out of this was that when you have where operators in your queries, and you also have or operators in your queries, especially within them, you need to kind of be careful. So what you can do sometimes is you can actually put your where, even if you only had one, you could, anything between these two or single quote marks, query, where, anything that goes in there, Joomla is going to put into its query. And so what you can do is you can actually put your own parentheses right here inside this, where, quote, and then put parentheses, even if it's just one thing. And then Joomla will always treat that. Yeah.
Since you like 6,
Yeah.
there's a new function called where or.
Ah,
You can use that as well.
very good. Thank you.
You know about that? When I
3.6. So it's very new.
you can use this as well.
Ah, well, that's great. So I will look into that as well. I didn't know about that, so I should follow it a little more closely. In any case, be careful or do what he said, and let's check out maybe there's some new methods out there for us, which is good. So now, let's just do an insert, which is the most dangerous kind of thing, because now you're actually putting things in instead of just doing things you might be able to undo. You can undo these two. So let's see. This is a random non-Joomla table to show how part of a typical database structure. Okay, right, so this is just some table that somebody has out there, and it is, typical stuff. So let's see. Table is named prefix BD people. We know that. We can see that people ID is an auto increment field. Okay, good. So you got to look at the database when you're working with and get to know it is what I'm saying. People business is a typical int field. Yeah, good. Joomla uses integer 11 a lot. So whenever I'm using integers, I like to also kind of mimic what Joomla uses for its native things. Like if Joomla uses article IDs or int 11s, I like to have my other IDs be that too. I kind of like to look and see what Joomla does in terms of how it's building out its fields and kind of mimic that to the extent I can. So let's see. So the point is not understanding what your database structure is can get you into trouble in ways. So I just want to say before you do this, understand that. Make sure you understand what the database structure is that you're working with. Okay. But before we go ahead and do an insert, let's look at kind of going off the book here for a bit. But imagine Joomla. Here's Joomla's content table. This is the main where Joomla's articles live, right? So you can see it has its ID, great, but it also has an asset ID, right? And you look at the assets and you see, oh, here's article 342, and it's the top 12 ways. That's the one we were looking at to do that. But wait, what's this asset ID? Where does that come from? And the reason I'm saying that is you got to watch out when you're just inserting things into Joomla core tables, because sometimes Joomla doesn't like you to do that because it's doing all kinds of other stuff. Joomla has its own API for inserting articles. So if you want to insert new articles with your database, you don't want to just write it into the content table without understanding what else Joomla needs. Now, if you're doing your own tables, your own databases that you designed, you're not going to have probably this asset ID. You're not going to have, like, if you ever look at the menu tables of Joomla, there's like a left and a right value, and you're like, well, how can I just wanted to write a new menu item in manually. You can't do that. You're going to mess up the system in a major way. You probably break your site, because Joomla uses this thing called nested sets. And the left and right values help it understand where the parents and child categories are of the menu. And that's something that gets really complicated. So you need to have these other tools that are available that are a lot more advanced. So the point, I guess, is just before you go inserting data, especially in a Joomla core table, make sure you know what you're doing. I mean, yeah, you could probably get away with changing like the titles. If you wanted to make a little component that pulls up 100 titles at a time and allows you to edit them in a form, yeah, go for it. You could make those edits, press go, and update all the titles in a Joomla just in the title field, not the alias, but just the title. And I think you'd be okay, because I don't think Joomla cares if you change the title around, but it is going to care if you mess with any of these things, or if you have new articles that don't have an asset ID, or if you mess with the left and right values in your menu, things like that. So you got to do some experimentation. But assuming you are okay and you're cleared for takeoff with your query, maybe you're in your own component like I was before with that BD people thing. I don't know if that was mine, but then you're able to do it. So I'm saying, okay, set, here's the insert. Insert into, pound __, here's my table name. Set people gender is this, set this, blah, 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 execute, and bam. That's just a screenshot from it. There you can see Tuxie got in there. And there's some notes about that. For example, just simple things like, if there's an auto increment field, you don't have to set that. MySQL is going to actually know what you're doing there. So you don't have to say, set the auto increment to the next available one, you don't need to do that. It'll do that automatically. So there's a lot of things that happens automatically with these queries as well. But yeah, so that went in. That's Tuxie Cat with a row of flush. So that's a good photo there of him. He's a good cat. So here's the same thing dynamically. If you had your own component that had, let's say it was a CRM system, for example, and you wanted to have an insert function or method for that, you would just do something like this. You'd say insert all this stuff, and you would build out your set of variables for that insert of that person into your database, and then you'd have something like this. You'd have to customize this for yourself, but basically here's all the fields, and I'm saying do insert contact, and then blam, you set it all up just with all those ways that I just showed you and gave you examples from, and you would execute the query, and bam, it would get inserted, just like that cat getting inserted into the it's not showing because it's on Wi-Fi, but it's a pretty cool picture of a cat getting into a jar. So that would be an example of an insert. Let me go here. Yeah, other queries as well. So obviously you can run anything you can run on the in the SQL line. If you ever go into like PHP MyAdmin and you see that little box that says just run SQL, run a query, you could do that through Joomla too. So you could do a delete query, for example. You could do anything you can do in MySQL, you can do through JDatabase. Sometimes it takes some messing around to get the syntax just right, which is why I recommend, like I said before, sometimes build out your query yourself and run it through Joomla's engine and see if it works right. But here, I'm just saying, do a deletion from users where the ID equals the bad user ID, 1, 2, 3. And you run that, and this guy, delete from table. See, I could have quote named that. I probably should have. But just like I showed you before, where the column equals the ID, execute the query, and return. Yeah, we just deleted that person. So, and you got to keep in mind, of course, when you delete from your tables, if it's a relational database, user 1, 2, 3, there's probably a user map somewhere on your site that said user 1, 2, 3 is in this group, user 1, 2, 3 is in this group. So don't forget when you just understand your context. So if you're going to delete from the users table, well, in this case, users is a core table. That's a core. I'm showing you a core Joomla thing. So there's going to be a user map entry for that person too. So you got to figure out where all this user may be also recorded in Joomla, and do another query. Especially if this were a Joomla core one, you'd probably want to add it within this method another thing saying, all right, let's go find this person in the user map table and delete them out of that, and just to keep your data nice and clean. So when I first got into this, it's so slow, it's so funny. When I first got into this, was 2012 was the first Joomla World Conference I came to, and this guy, Louis Landry, was there giving a speech, and he had written this book with this other guy, Mark Dexter, who was also there. I don't know if they're still around. But they had this book called Zumo Programming, and it's really good. I think you can find used copies now. It's older now, but it's really good. They have exercises in the book and stuff like that, and that's how I kind of got into it. And then most of the rest is just me playing around with stuff to kind of come up with my own little ideas on stuff. But I recommend that, and I recommend on the bottom down here in these notes section, I have links to a lot of places. And then this course code library, I just listed out. You can go there and download all these examples and just copy and paste to your editor and play with them. And you'll have to customize the table names and stuff, and use it on a test Joomla install, for example, and just play with some of these things. And you may need to refine them for your own purposes, but it's a kind of a nice starting point. I put some advanced type of queries in there too, like say you wanted to do a join query, which if you're familiar with how databases work, you know why you might need those from time to time. But here's an example of those, and I didn't put everything in there. There's union queries and more advanced types of queries, but I put quite a bit of stuff in there. Here's one, a find and set example, which is a weird, obscure thing that you can do with MySQL when you have a string like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and you just want to query a record that may have a 3 in it in that field. So it's kind of a interesting way where I've seen sites where instead of having a relational database with a mapping table, like user 1 belongs to category, like if you have categories, for example, and you have like these entities are in this category. Usually you'd have a mapping table for that. So over here in the mapping, you've, item 1, 2, 3, 4, and over here you have item 1 belongs in category 7, item 1 belongs in category 5, and mapping table. But sometimes you can do it kind of in a rudimentary way, and in your main table, instead of having a relational database, you have just everything in one big table. So you might have a categories listing here of, instead of having a mapping table, you just have one. Like, so here's a list of categories: 1, 3, 4, and 7. So you don't have to do. You can do like a pseudo relational database. Like, there's a lot of weird things that MySQL has functions to kind of help you with, but that's another example. Oh yeah, and I want. So let's say nesting parts of your queries within conditionals. So here, let's say I had one called Get Customer Records. I just made this up. This isn't anything real. But I want to get all the records for some user out of my fake CRM system where the payment method is whatever I was submitted. Let's say I can submit credit or PayPal. I'm just making this up just to show you. So let's imagine it gets past values of like 1, 2, 3, and credit. So down here you're saying select everything. Let's select the record from customer purchases, let's just say, where, and here I've said the customer is 1, 2, 3. Now I'm saying down here, okay, if the payment method is credit, then I'm going to say where payment method equals, say, let's say it's a 100. And if it's PayPal, let's say their code for that is a 200. So I'm saying, so when you build out these things, you can use normal PHP code and normal PHP practices to build out your queries the same way. So when you have these where conditionals here, they don't, you can couch them within if statements. Like, oh, if the payment's this, then do the where like that. Maybe you want to do your ordering, query order. Here I have a date ascending, and here I had date descending. So those methods are available too. The ordering is super important. You'll probably find yourself messing around with ordering a lot, because obviously when you want your data back, you'll quite often want it ordered the way you want it, and there's nothing wrong with that. What else do I got here? Some other goodies. This one just counts the number of rows, and no big deal. You can go over that. Does anybody have questions about this kind of stuff? Anything? Yes.
So in each of these functions, you have this get DB, which JFactory dot get DB, I think.
Oh, down here in this bottom one, you mean?
Like in each function, you're getting a connection, right, to write a query.
Yeah.
Does JDatabase handle all of the connection handling, too many connections, closing connections?
Well, okay, so you need to, whenever in your script, you have to call that. You have to call JDatabase. I don't know. I'm following the question 100%, but I think that as long as you call this at some point, yeah, I think it's probably. We can talk afterwards. I have a specific case or something like that. It also might matter if you have, depending on how you structure these as functions or methods within a class, of how that's called and stuff like that. These are just meant to be very basic examples, but you'll soon find if you haven't called that, or if it's not recognizing that you called it, you'll know, because your query is not going to work. So, but does anyone have any? Yeah.
Is there a good way to connect to like some existing access databases?
Access databases. Every now and then you have to connect to something weird, and I've never had to do that. I've had to use other weird things as data sources quite a lot, like CSV files or Excel spreadsheets or whatever. I haven't come across the access database. I'm sure there's stuff online for that. Probably the best thing is to figure that out once and transfer it into your other database. Just dump it all in and then work with it from like MySQL. But your mileage might vary on that specific issue. I'm not.
Or a live connection to any other data source.
Well, you mean, can Joomla do that, or are you asking just?
What would be a good approach for solving that kind of problem?
It depends on what your outcome, I'd say, needs to be. I mean.
So you can't import data and dump it into the Joomla database. You have to run some kind of a live query to an external database. Would you just write your own classes?
I mean, yeah, I would probably, depending on what it is, I'd probably write some sort of script to import it into a MySQL temporary table, probably, and then mess with it from there. I might do it that way. It really would depend on a case by case. Yeah. Yep.
Regarding my access, you might want to look into ODBC connection.
Right.
So you can use ODBC
Yeah, absolutely. So, anyone other question? All right. Well, as I said, if you go to, this is the address of the course. It's arraywebdevelopment/courses/JDatabase, and then just type intro01.php for now. It's the only thing I gave it. I'll put a link on my main website, Array Web Development, so you can go get these slides and all the text, all the code examples. But for now, if you just remember that /JDatabase/intro01, you'll be able to get to the slides now before I link to them. I might take off these cat GIFs simply because I don't want to have like some copyright people coming after me for some reason. Yeah, well, I got sued a couple times already by Getty Images, so I don't want to take any chances. But for the purposes of this, I like showing them. Anyway, well, thanks for coming. And if anybody has any questions on database stuff, just let me know. Happy to help out. Yeah.
If you turn on debug in Joomla configuration in the backend, you can see the performance of your queries.
Yeah.
I noticed the worst queries, and I'm working on a project now where it's really complex stuff. I've got selects, embedded, and selects, all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But still, there's some Joomla core queries. The performance of them is way worse than anything I would do in my clumsy.
Yeah, you know, especially when you start getting a larger Joomla site, and the volume of data goes up a lot, then those queries become time consuming and they become very difficult sometimes. And it's usually within the context of larger sets of data when that becomes an issue, because there are some quite complicated queries that come up, not only in Joomla but in a lot of extensions commonly. Like VirtueMart is kind of a classic for that one. A client's always calling because VirtueMart is slowed down to a crawl for some reason, and it's usually because they have like 8,000 things in it. And when it's just going to do something simple like rendering the categories, it goes through very complicated queries.
So if you can't do anything about their SQL because it's a third-party component or a Joomla core thing, you can go in and fiddle with the indexes?
You know, I think there's a, are you talking about, you could mess with,
Well, let's make a query on something that's not indexed. I could go in and add an index myself.
I don't know. I mean, it would depend on the case by case thing. Anything's worth trying. You know, I mean, if your site's not performing, then you gotta take a look at it. And yeah, I mean, it's a big problem, especially for larger sites. Usually anything with a small, you know, couple thousand articles or something like that, you hardly ever see problems with that kind of thing. But yeah, performance-wise, it may mean, if a site's too slow, it may mean you have to look for another solution that doesn't have that, or custom code your own solution, which is great because if you can do this, if you can successfully take data out of that database and put it back into the database as you like, then that frees you to build your own components instead of relying on other components that may have a lot of bulky stuff just like that. So sometimes for some people, I mean, yeah, to rebuild VirtueMart would be a big deal because it's a whole e-commerce system. But if the client has 10,000 products, you know, then they have the budget probably for this too, and they may want to look at that just from a pure performance perspective. That and putting it on a server with more RAM, I guess. But I mean, you know, so. Well, if there's no other questions, yeah, I think it's time to go. So thanks, everyone. Appreciate it.